At exactly 10:46 p.m. Eastern Time on a Friday night, a single order was signed that would dismantle a decades-long regime in less than 5 hours. While the world slept, the largest armada ever assembled in the history of South America began to move in total silence. Operation Absolute Resolve was no longer a plan on a whiteboard. It was a lethal, multi-pronged strike involving over 150 aircraft launching from 20 different bases across the Western Hemisphere. These planes, including stealth drones, bombers, and fighter jets, flew just 100 feet above the Caribbean waters to remain invisible to Venezuelan radar. As they crossed the final ridge of high terrain surrounding Caracas, the element of surprise was total. The city's lights began to flicker and die, not by accident, but due to a calculated cyber and intelligence assault that rendered the nation's air defenses powerless. In the heart of the capital, the ground began to shake as explosions rocked Fuerte Tiuna, the country's most fortified military complex. Residents in East Caracas reported that their houses swayed with every blast, while those near the military bases woke to what sounded like a full-scale war. But amidst the fire and smoke at the port of La Guaira and the Igarote airport, the real target was a single man who believed he was safe behind walls of solid steel. Nicolás Maduro, the man who had ruled Venezuela for 12 years, scrambled toward a high-tech safe room as U.S. commandos breached his compound. He never reached the door because, in the words of the American president, the extraction force was too fast. The question that would soon haunt every world leader was simple. How did the United States manage to snatch a sitting president from his own fortress without losing a single soldier? The success of the raid didn't just rely on firepower. It was built on a foundation of betrayal that reached into Maduro's most intimate circles. For months, a clandestine CIA team had been operating in the shadows of Venezuela, aided by a high-level human source who sat within the president's inner circle. This informant provided the U.S. with a detailed pattern of life that mapped out Maduro's every move. Intelligence analysts didn't just know his schedule, they knew the details of his clothes, what he ate, and even the specifics of his pets. This granular data allowed the U.S. Army's elite Delta Force to rehearse the extraction for months, ensuring that failure was never an option. While the U.S. had placed a staggering $50 million bounty on Maduro's head, this operation was described as the culmination of meticulous planning between the CIA and the Department of War. As the helicopters of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment touched down in the compound, they faced a hailstrike of gunfire, yet they remained operable. One U.S. aircraft was hit hard but managed to remain flyable throughout the mission. Inside the palace, Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, realized the Cartel de los Soles could no longer protect them and ultimately gave themselves up to federal agents and Delta Force operators. Within minutes, the couple was blindfolded, handcuffed, and whisked away on a helicopter flight toward the USS Iwo Jima, an amphibious assault ship waiting in the Caribbean. Back in the States, the administration was already preparing the world for what came next, but as the first photos of a captured Maduro surfaced, the legal and geopolitical fallout was only beginning to ignite. By Saturday evening, the bus driver who became a revolutionary successor was no longer in command of a nation, but a prisoner of the American justice system. A plane carrying Maduro and Flores touched down at Stewart Air National Guard Base in New York, where they were met by a phalanx of FBI and DEA agents. The scene was surreal. A former head of state led off a plane in shackles, wearing a black hoodie and a hat to shield his face. In a 12-second video released by the White House, Maduro is seen being perp-walked through a DEA hallway in Manhattan. Despite the gravity of the moment, Maduro appeared to look at the cameras and offer a good night and a happy new year to those watching. He was immediately processed and transferred to the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, a facility known for housing high-profile inmates like Sean Diddy Combs and Sam Bankman-Fried. The indictment waiting for him was devastating, accusing him of a 25-year conspiracy to use the Venezuelan government as a tool for narco-terrorism. Prosecutors allege that Maduro partnered with the FARC and state-sponsored gangs like Tren de Aragua to flood the United States with thousands of tons of cocaine. The charges include the possession of machine guns and destructive devices, with Attorney General Pam Bondi promising that Maduro would face the full wrath of American justice. However, as the U.S. celebrated the capture of an international criminal, reports began to filter out of Caracas about the human cost of the absolute resolve. A senior Venezuelan official reported that at least 40 people, including both soldiers and innocent civilians, were killed during the midnight strikes. One woman, Rosa Gonzalez, was reportedly killed when a missile struck her 3-story apartment building. This mounting death toll has triggered a wave of condemnation from the international community, leaving the world to wonder if this was an arrest or an act of war. The geopolitical stage is now divided by a chasm of state terrorism allegations and freedom celebrations. Iran's foreign minister called the strikes a clear example of state terrorism, while Russia's foreign ministry denounced the capture as an unacceptable infringement on sovereignty. China went even further, demanding the immediate release of Maduro and his wife and urging the U.S. to stop toppling governments. Within the region, leaders like Brazil's Lula da Silva warned that the U.S. had crossed an unacceptable line. Yet, in the streets of Bogotá and Miami, the air was filled with the sounds of national anthems and chants of Libertad. For many Venezuelan exiles, this was the end of a 26-year nightmare. But while the crowds cheered, the halls of Congress in Washington were filled with anger and suspicion. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer slammed the administration for keeping lawmakers in the total dark regarding the operation, fearing that the U.S. was being sucked into another nation-building quagmire. Democratic Senator Tim Kaine went as far as to label it an illegal war, promising to force a vote on a war powers resolution. Even some Republicans, like Representative Brian Fitzpatrick, argued that the only country the U.S. should be running is the United States. The administration's defense was blunt. Secretary of State Marco Rubio argued that Maduro was a fugitive of American justice and that notifying Congress would have endangered the lives of the special operators. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth summarized the sentiment of the White House in 5 words, stating that Maduro simply effed around and he found out. But the true motivation for the raid may have been revealed in a moment of startling transparency regarding the world's largest oil reserves. The most compelling piece of evidence that this mission was about more than just narcotics came from the president himself. During a press conference at Mar-a-Lago, Trump declared that the United States is now in the oil business in Venezuela. With reserves estimated at 300 billion barrels, surpassing even Saudi Arabia, the president announced that major U.S. oil companies would be sent in to spend billions of dollars fixing the rotted and broken infrastructure. He claimed the goal was to get the oil flowing and start making money for the country, asserting that the U.S. would run Venezuela until a transition could occur. This move has sent shockwaves through the energy sector. While Chevron already operates there in a limited capacity, giants like ConocoPhillips have stated it is premature to speculate on future investments. The administration's plan involves a temporary governing group including Hegseth, Rubio, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. This announcement has drawn fierce criticism from opponents like Representative Adam Smith, who accused the president of launching a regime change war specifically to seize oil. Even former allies like Marjorie Taylor Greene have spoken out, suggesting that the operation contradicts an America First stance and asking why the administration pardoned other convicted drug traffickers while targeting Maduro. The president, however, remains unmoved, stating he is not afraid of boots on the ground and that U.S. forces are already there, ready to ensure the country is run properly. But as the U.S. settles into its new role as the administrator of a sovereign South American nation, a new and even more dangerous objective has emerged from the shadows of the State Department. The capture of Maduro was not the end of the mission, but potentially the first chapter in a much larger regional conflict. In the final moments of his address to the nation, the president dropped a chilling hint about the future of the Caribbean. He described Cuba as a failing nation and stated that the island would be something we'll end up talking about. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, the architect of maximum pressure sanctions, was even more explicit, warning the Cuban government that they should be concerned at least a little bit. Rubio pointed out that Maduro's security and spy agencies were full of Cubans and that Venezuela must now declare independence from Havana. This is more than just rhetoric. Venezuela currently supplies Cuba with 30,000 barrels of oil every single day, a lifeline that keeps the island's already failing power grid alive. With that oil now under U.S. control, Cuba faces a total economic collapse that could trigger the very state of commotion the U.S. just exploited in Caracas. In Havana, a defiant President Miguel Díaz-Canel organized an emergency rally of 30,000 people to condemn the criminal assault, but the fear among the Cuban people is palpable as they wait to see if they are the next target for absolute resolve. Critics like Senator Mark Warner warned that this sets a dangerous precedent that could allow other global powers to abduct leaders they dislike, potentially leading to total chaos on the international stage. Maduro is currently sitting in a jail cell in Brooklyn, his hands no longer holding the levers of power, but his capture has opened a Pandora's box of interventionism that the world hasn't seen in over 3 decades. The U.S. has reclaimed the oil, arrested the suspect, and silenced the air defenses, but the most haunting question remains unanswered. 36 years to the day after the U.S. captured Manuel Noriega in Panama, history has repeated itself in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. The dictator is gone, the perp walk is over, and the largest oil reserves on the planet are now under American management. But as the light slowly returned to Caracas under the watchful eye of 15,000 U.S. troops, the world is left to ponder the president's final warning. If the long arm of American justice can reach into a fortified military palace and snatch a president from his safe room, then no leader, anywhere, is truly untouchable. The mission was absolute resolve, and for Nicolás Maduro, the resolution was final. For the rest of the region, the uncertainty has only just begun.